Hello, everyone, and welcome to another weekly edition of our Value of the Week, our weekly Middah, where we explore a Jewish value that emerges from the Haftarah, and one we can carry into our own lives. And it may seem a little early for this, but the weekly value is teshuvah, often translating as repentance. But I think the better translation is returning. The idea of returning to who we really are, returning to God, returning to our deepest values. And our Haftarah comes from the prophet Jeremiah. And it's not exactly an easy read. The prophets rarely are. God speaks through Jeremiah with such heartbreak. What wrong did your ancestors find in me that they went so far from me? It says. It's not the voice of an angry king demanding obedience. It's the voice of someone grieving the loss of relationship. In fact, one really striking thing about Jeremiah is that he doesn't describe our relationship with God as a legal contract. He describes it almost like a marriage or a deep friendship. There's love, there's trust. And when the relationship is neglected, there is real pain. Later in the Haftarah, Jeremiah quotes God asking this haunting question: can a nation exchange its gods even though they are not gods? But my people have exchanged their glory for what cannot help them. In other words, we've traded what is lasting for what is temporary. We've traded purpose for distraction, meaning for convenience, connection for busyness. And if we're honest, that's a temptation that didn't end in biblical times. I don't know how many people intentionally wake up and say, today I'd like to drift away from my values. It happens gradually. Work gets busy, life gets complicated. Our schedules become full. We spend more time reacting than reflecting. And before we know it, we're wandering farther from the people we hoped to become. That's why I love the Jewish understanding of teshuvah. Teshuvah isn't about beating ourselves up. It isn't about guilt. It's about remembering the way home. The word itself in Hebrew means to return. Return to your best self. Return to the values that ground you. Return to the relationships that matter most. That is what teshuvah means. Return to God who never stops waiting for us. This Haftarah is always read during the 3 weeks, the period between the fast of the 17th of Tammuz and Tisha B'Av. These are weeks when we remember the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple. But our tradition isn't asking us simply to mourn the past. It's asking us to notice the ways that destruction can begin in our own lives. A neglected friendship, a harsh word we never apologized for, a community we stopped investing in, a spiritual life we've allowed to grow quiet. The good news is that Jeremiah's message doesn't end with brokenness. In fact, in the final verse we read, God longs to hear Israel cry out, "My Father." It's a reminder that no matter how far we've wandered, the conversation with God can begin again. It can be renewed. One prayer, one act of kindness, one apology, one moment of gratitude, one decision to show up. That's how teshuvah begins. You know, one of the beautiful things about Judaism is that it never expects perfection. It expects movement. Again and again, our tradition tells us that what matters isn't that we've wandered. What matters is that we're willing to take the next step home. So this week, I'd invite you to ask yourself, where have I drifted from the person I want to be? What relationship needs my attention? What value have I neglected? What would one small step What would one small step towards home look like this week? Because teshuvah doesn't happen all at once. It begins with a single turn of the heart. And every time we make that turn, we discover something remarkable. God has been waiting for us all the time. May this week be one of gentle returning to kindness, returning to purpose, returning to community, returning to hope, and returning to the one who always believes we can begin again. Wishing you an early Shabbat Shalom.